year at Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge. See what visitors are chirping about with Box Elder County. For info, activities, and more, visit boxeldercounty.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Partly cloudy skies today with a high of 73. It warms up for the weekend with a high of 88 on Saturday. And right now, 66 degrees with sunny skies. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com for Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
The debate on the value of higher education in our country has become mired in everything from the culture war. It's been dragged down in kind of a race to the bottom, instant certainty rules. Outrage is always justified depending on where you're coming from on the compass. But I want to have a better conversation about it because I think this debate actually matters. It has real impact. Parents and kids are weighing students' educational experience, what it's going to cost. It's going to have big impact on their futures. And so I want to be thinking about the ideas and the ideals of what we should be aiming for and what can our institutions achieve when given the right incentives. So let's have a different kind of conversation. Let's begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
Now, I know that when it comes to higher education, there are a lot of opinions and a lot of white-hot, red-hot, hot takes, and we're not going to do that today because that's not what we do on this show. I think when we begin this, we really have to go back to something that Daniel Webster once said before a big debate in Congress. He said to the president, he said, when a mariner has been tossed about for many days in thick weather on an unknown sea, he naturally avails himself of the first pause in the storm, the earliest glance at the sun to take this latitude and ascertain where he actually is in relation to the desired course. Webster went on to say, we should imitate this prudence before we float on the waves of this debate and refer to the point from which we departed, that we may at least be able to conjecture where we now are. So when it comes to this debate about higher education, I think we should start with the data and what that actually is telling us. And when we think data, we always turn our attention to Pew Research Center as a trusted source. Richard Fry is a senior researcher there at Pew Research and is an expert on school and college enrollment in the United States, as well as the return to education in the labor market, marriage market, and its connection to household economic well-being. And Richard, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind words. Good to be with you.
All right, let's get right to the data because I know that's where you eat, breathe, and drink every day. And so, what does the data tell us in terms of this value? Is college worth it? Just from the number standpoint, what are we learning?
So, what we did is twofold. Number one, I can give you sort of the public's assessment of whether a four-year college degree is worth it. And then also I can sort of look into, standard government data sources, and I can give you an idea of what young adults with and without a college, what they're earning and what their incomes are. So it's kind of a twofold assessment. Let's first talk about sort of the public's assessment. Here we asked adults. This was around last Thanksgiving. Given the cost of a four-year degree, is it worth it? And sort of what I consider sort of a sobering finding, only 22% of U.S. adults said it's worth getting a four-year college degree, even if you have to borrow to get it. And so that suggests to me that the issue of how to finance a college degree and maybe the difficulties of, sort of paying student loans, clearly borrowing is playing a role. But, again, only 1 in 5 said it's worth it, even if you have to borrow. And then related to that, you go to college for a lot of reasons. And we didn't probe them all. But we asked how important is it to have a four-year college degree in order to get a well-paying job in today's economy. So this was sort of strictly the labor market benefits of a bachelor's degree. And here, only 25% of adults said it's extremely or very important, to get a college degree in order to get a well-paying job. Again, not, I would say, a ringing endorsement in the public's mind of the benefits of college. Now, as turning to the government data, I'm going to talk about young men. I could talk about young women, but let's talk about young men. We can track this all the way basically back to the 1970s. And when you sort of look at outcomes for, let's say, a young man who finishes his education at high school, so he's got his high school diploma, but nothing further. The general take is that it's been a really difficult 50 years for those young men. Their earnings have been falling. Their labor force participation has been down. They've had trouble finding full-time, full-year jobs. And one of the key findings of this analysis is that sort of declining circumstances, it ended around 2014. The past 10 years have been improving fortunes for young men who, have no education beyond high school. Their earnings are up, their household incomes are up. Now, outcomes for college-educated young men have also improved. But finally, I would say the data says that the bleeding has kind of finally stopped for young men who don't go on to college. And it's basically been a pretty good 10 years, at least nationally, for less educated young men.
Yeah, fascinating. The numbers are just so telling, one, in terms of perception, in terms of what the public is thinking and expressing, the data in terms of what's actually happening in terms of those that do and don't get a four-year degree. Great perspective, great insight. Richard Fry from the Pew Research Center. Richard, thanks so much for joining us today.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
All right, again, that's Richard Fry, Senior Researcher at Pew Research Center. And so that's the data. Those are the data sets, and I think it's always interesting to compare and contrast in terms of what the perception is. And currently the perception, both for those with and without higher education, is that many are questioning the value. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't value, and I thought Richard pointed this out in an important way, is that there's a lot of other reasons that you go to a four-year college, that you get a degree or an advanced degree beyond just the certificate itself. So we have to get into that part of the equation. I want to go to what we're actually trying to get out of education and actually go back to a conversation we had with Ezekiel Emanuel from the University of Pennsylvania. Talked about the European tradition of higher education and what we're actually trying to get out of it. Take a listen.
In the United States, we considered college education to train people in two major things. One, to train them to be democratic citizens, to understand and be independent thinkers, to assess data, to come up with their own ideas that could then play out in the public realm. The other is to become better people themselves, to think about their own lives, what really matters in their lives, what do all people who have thought about this deeply in previous histories advise. Those two things were the goal, and the goal was realized by having these liberal arts courses that were shared across the campus in the first 2 years of college before kids majored and then before they went on to postgraduate, more skills and job preparation.
So fascinating insight there, and we're going to stay with this conversation. Zach, we want to come back at 2:35. We're actually going to have Ezekiel Emanuel back on the program. He'll be joining us from the University of Pennsylvania as we dig in just a little bit deeper into the conversation as it relates to higher education. Again, it's not just about the culture war stuff. It's not about protests on campus. We want to get down to what do we actually want out of this for society, for businesses, for the communities, for a country. We're going to get to that part of the conversation and what do we want these individuals, not big blocks of students and numbers and Social Security numbers, real people that are going to make a real difference in our society. What do we want them to experience? How do we want them to be transformed through their higher education experience? And are the dollars and cents adding up to make all of that worthwhile? We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson.
Breaking news at KSL News Radio. We've just gotten word that the jury has reached a verdict in the trial of Chad Daybell, who is, of course, accused of killing his first wife, Tammy Daybell, and the children of his second wife, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. We understand that verdict will be read at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So we will do our best to bring you updated coverage as that event happens. This is a pretty quick turnaround for a death penalty case to have a verdict that quickly. We're working on getting some analysis right now to see what we can learn about what that means for the jury's decision and the timeline for the penalty phase, which might happen next. In the meantime, to repeat, a verdict has been reached in the trial of Chad Daybell. It will happen live at 2 o'clock. Live, Becky Bruce, KSL News Radio.
Once you've logged out, punch in.
Good afternoon, 3 o'clock at KSL News Radio.
Put Jeff Kaplan in the passenger seat with traffic and weather every 10 minutes on the 9s, breaking news, and the day's biggest stories. Jeff Kaplan's Afternoon News, 3 to 7 on KSL News Radio.
It's a mystery where Old Spice finds its amazing scents like Himalayan sea salt, but I'm thrilled they have because no other body wash exfoliates and moisturizes 24/7 like Old Spice Gentleman's Himalayan sea salt body wash. Now, if only there was a mountain range separating the Indian subcontinent from the Tibetan plateau where I could hide my Old Spice and keep my family from stealing it, my impossibly smooth skin will finally be safe.
Free is key during Craftsman Days at Lowe's. Right now, get one free Select V20 tool when you buy a Select Battery 2-pack. Plus, get your choice of a V20 drill or impact driver kit for $69. Don't miss your chance to save on the high-quality, high-performance tools you need during Craftsman Days. Because Lowe's knows tools. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 6/19. While supplies last. Selection varies by location.
When it comes to my lifestyle and diet, I don't always make the smartest choices.
Touchdown! Woo! Hey, how about another round and some more chips?
But when it comes to taking care of my liver, I do make one very smart choice. Active liver tablets from New Nordic. I used to have real issues with my liver, and at my last checkup, my doc was concerned about my numbers. But since adding a once-a-day active liver tablet, my gut's better, I feel great, and my doctor's happy. I ask a lot of my liver, so the least I can do to say thanks is a daily dose of Active Liver.
You ask a lot of your liver, so give it the support it needs with Active Liver. You can find Active Liver at Amazon.com or ask for Active Liver at your local CVS. Or for a volume discount, visit NewNordicUSA.com. Go to new, NORDICUSA.com, Amazon, or ask for Active Liver at your local CVS.
The Management Minute is a service of the MBA program in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm Scott Hammond. If you've applied for a job using one of the many computer-based systems, artificial intelligence is likely being used to screen your application. In the UK, after being furloughed for COVID, some employees were asked to reapply for jobs that they'd already successfully done. One woman was rejected because, according to the computer, she had poor body language during the interview. The algorithms used in some artificial intelligence systems attempt to objectify what is inherently subjective. For the sake of efficiency, they make decisions that impact a company and the lives of applicants. But we don't yet know the cost. We know that a biased hiring manager can do damage, but so can a computer algorithm. Learn more about ethical hiring practices in an MBA from Utah State University.
Go to utahstatemba.com. That's utahstatemba.com.
I'm Scott Hammond. Hope to see you in one of our classes.
With almost 9,000 reviews on Google and countless before and after pictures and videos, SodaWeightLoss.com has helped people turn their lives around, get off the medications, and stay healthy for the rest of their life. Like Nick, who let go of 42 pounds in 5 weeks.
Before this, I was pre-diabetic. I had high cholesterol and acid reflux. And when I went to the doctor last week, I had none of those things. She took me off all of my medicines.
It's been almost a year since my My doctor told me I was type 2 diabetic, which was a real sobering moment. But as it turns out, the wake-up call I'd been needing. He put me on medication, but said it was still early enough to be reversed if I made some life changes. With the help and encouragement of Soda's amazing nutritionists and dietitians, I let go of 70 pounds in 5 months. Now I finally like how I look, but more importantly, I'm no longer diabetic, and even my sleep apnea has dramatically improved. Don't wait anymore. Go to sodaweightloss.com to get started. SOTA weightloss.com. SOTA stands for, say it with me, state of the art.
Getting help with plumbing repairs is easier than you think. All you have to do is call Any Hour Services or schedule an appointment at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
At Social Security, we are always thinking of ways to save you time and make things easier. That's why we created My Social Security. Opening a My Social Security account gives you secure access to your personal record and interactive tools tailored for you. You can see if you are eligible to receive benefits, view spousal benefit estimates, and compare retirement benefit estimates at different ages or dates when you want to start receiving benefits. Already receiving benefits? Use your account to change your address, set up or change direct deposit, get a proof of income letter, and more. In most states, you can also request a replacement Social Security card. Save time. Go online. Open a My Social Security account at ssa.gov/myaccount. Social Security. Securing today and tomorrow.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson.
When we're trying to digest the news of the day, we have to remember that instant certainty is the enemy of truth. A flashy headline may distract you from the real issue and the important conversations underneath.
Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson, 1 to 3 on KSL News Radio.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, the jury has reached a verdict now in the Chad Daybell murder trial in Boise. The court plans to read that verdict at 2 o'clock. KSL News Radio will carry that court proceeding live. Second, one car crashed into a house in Provo this morning. Another ran into a car dealership. The drivers of both cars were injured. And third, putting Third West underground could create a pedestrian promenade in front of the Delta Center. 66 degrees and sunny in Salt Lake City. Back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Well, we've all been taught the tips and tricks to make sure we're protecting our data, particularly our important financial data. But now, are strong passwords going to be enough to protect and provide any kind of relief that our data is secure? Can we exhale? I think the answer is no. But why is that? And it's such an interesting thing to explore that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a deep dive and look at what is happening at the government level, the policy level, that may be impacting even all the good things you're doing to try to keep your financial data safe. Is it really, and is the government helping or hurting that whole process? Nick Anthony's policy analyst at the Cato Institute, part of the Monetary and Financial Alternatives Center there at Cato Institute. And Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime, so I was excited when you reached out.
Well, it's a great piece. The piece in Reason, you can see that at reason.com, The Illusion of Financial Privacy. And so, Nick, just start walking us through it. A lot of people think, oh, I've got my 15-character super-duper password. I am all safe and secure. But what's the government doing to help or hurt that whole process?
Well, you're exactly right. Everybody thinks that they have that password, they shield the ATM, they close the door when they meet with the banker, or they use a hushed voice, and that's enough to protect them. And maybe worse yet, people think that, well, if the government wants to know what's going on, they need to get a warrant. They need to prove that I've done something wrong, or they have a reasonable reason to intrude on my privacy. But that's not how it works at all. What we really have in this country is an illusion of financial privacy. People believe it's protected by the Fourth Amendment, and yet that really hasn't been the case for over 50 years.
Wow. And you dug into this so powerfully in your piece. It gave me a lot of chances to just pause and say, okay, we've always been worried about what the government is and isn't doing. And some of those things that aren't even necessarily big pieces of legislation, but are often tucked into other pieces of legislation that allow the government to do more things. The Patriot Act, for instance, in terms of surveillance powers. Kind of walk us through some of those things that maybe have been unraveling that security when it comes to our financial data.
Well, the Patriot Act is something that I don't think many people realize they interact with almost every day. This was when Congress said, okay, we need to fight terrorism. That's good. We need to protect American citizens. That's also good. And yet the way they decided to go about that was to force people to identify themselves just to have access to the financial system. And really, that's not so good. That's when you're getting into clear Fourth Amendment questions. And so what we now call know your customer requirements, or sometimes abbreviated as just KYC, that's anytime you go to the bank and they ask for your ID, or maybe you open an account and they ask you what your job is. Are you affiliated with politics? Where do you live? Who can vouch for you? And all of that. All of that ties back to the Patriot Act. And it's trying to catch terrorists. And again, that's a good thing to want to stop all of these heinous crimes and protect the American people. But we need to be very careful about how we go about these things. We can't just throw out the entire system, all the protections that have made this country great, just to pursue security.
Yeah, and that's if we give up all that power for security, we're not going to have the security or any of the other freedoms that go along with that. And one of the other pieces that you pointed out that just brought back all the pandemic fun stuff for me was the American Rescue Plan. I remember when this first came out, and there was a big uproar saying, "Wait a minute, why is it that the banks now can suddenly check into any activity that's over $600. I think, man, people are doing that on Venmo now. So kind of describe how that got slipped in and then the impacts of that.
So this really started coming out of the Treasury more so than Congress, when it wanted to look to how does it increase the tax revenue. Well, it wants to increase surveillance to not leave as much money on the table. And so the Treasury pitched the idea to the administration and Congress, who ultimately ran with it, of, all right, let's surveil every bank account with at least $600 in annual activity, just $600. And luckily, like you were saying, people saw that immediately and said, wait, this is not how this should work. This is not something that we're okay with. And so people pushed back. People were calling their representatives in Congress. People were on the news saying, how could this be allowed? And luckily, there were people in the government who had some logic and reason and realized this was a bad idea and walked it back. However, what wasn't so lucky was, as you said, they didn't walk it back completely. They limited it to things like Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, and the like. So those providers, those payment services, do have to report your activity once it hits $600 in annual activity. And real quick, just to put that into a little more perspective, this isn't new entirely. There are instances where activity needs to be reported, but previously the limit was $20,000. And now it's being dropped in one fell swoop down to $600.
Wow.
That is just almost hard to get your mind around.
It is. We got just about a minute to go, Nick, and I just want you to give us something that we should be thinking about. How do we bust through kind of this illusion of financial privacy? And then what should we be doing to make sure that we're doing all that we can and being aware of what might be happening within government behind the scenes?
Well, I think it's exactly that. It's important that people pay attention to just what is going on in Congress, what their representatives are voting for and standing for as we consider what privacy is going to mean going forward in the digital age. All too often, things slip by because they're buried in legislative weeds, and it's by no means easy to keep track of that. It's by no means a simple feat to see what's going on in a 1,000-page bill, but the more people that are able to do so, the more people that are able to speak up, the more likely it is we might actually see some change.
Yeah, this is really a crucial conversation. Nick Anthony, policy analyst at the Cato Institute Center for monetary and financial alternatives. And Nick, this is great perspective. Again, people, you can check that out at reason.com today. Fantastic piece. Don't just think because you got that super duper secret password that everything is all safe and well. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of things in government and beyond that we've got to be aware of if we're going to really have that confidence that our data, especially our financial data, is secure. Nick, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. That's an important conversation. A lot of these things that we see arguments about in chasing terrorists and making sure we have homeland security, good stuff. You got to get the balancing act right. It's why warrants matters. People have to make the case if they're going to scrape through your data. There's a host of things that we need to make sure Congress is looking at so that they're looking out for you. We'll be right back.
It's 1:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomis. KSL's top story this hour. We have breaking news. The jury has reached a verdict in the Chad Daybell murder trial in Boise. They began their deliberations yesterday. The court plans to have that verdict read coming up at 2 o'clock. KSL News Radio will have live coverage of the verdict as it's announced in the courtroom. Chad Daybell is charged with 3 counts of murder. He's accused of killing his first wife, Tammy, along with 2 children of his second wife, J.J. Vallow and Tidey Ryan. His wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, has already been convicted in that case. The Smith Entertainment Group envisions a promenade leading to the front doors of the Delta Center. KSL News Radio's Tammy Kikuchi reports there's a roadblock, literally.
The roadblock is 300 West. The 2-block section would have to go underground, which would cost an estimated hundreds of millions of dollars. There are issues including a tracks line, groundwater, and buried utilities. Still, the idea was recently presented to state lawmakers. Both UDOT, which owns the road, and Salt Lake City support the idea of a tunnel for 3rd West and a promenade on top to make the area more walkable.
3rd West is a 6-lane road, which is intimidating and a bit dangerous for bicyclists and pedestrians. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Still waiting for a verdict now in the hush money case against former President Donald Trump, and we'll, of course, be bringing that to you when that comes down as well. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average down on the day 299 points. The NASDAQ is down 147 points. And our KSL weather looks like we'll see things warm up. That's next. KSL News Time, 1:30.
It's a priority for us at this station to bring you all sides of a story and to talk about the news fairly, completely.
Get all the facts and be really aware. Utah's Morning News with us, Tim and Amanda.
Weekday mornings 5 to 9 on KSL News Radio.
You wouldn't know it, but most financial advisors are put in a box. I'm Jeff Jr. from Trajan Wealth, and I want to provide you a little insight about financial advisors. Most financial advisors have to sell what their company requires them to sell, and many advisors have to only adhere to what's called a suitability standard. A suitability standard is a limited standard of care, not requiring what's sold to be best just suitable. Advisors with this loose standard often have limited investment and product selection. Trajan Wealth is held to a fiduciary standard, which is the highest standard of care in the advisory business. And that's just one of the many reasons we have billions of dollars under our care and attract clients from other advisors. Raise your standards today and call Trajan Wealth. Call 801-899-7600. That's 801-899-7600.
Advisory services offered through Trajan Wealth, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor.
Advertising used to be simple. Your options were radio, TV, newspaper, and let's not forget the yellow pages. Now it seems like a tidal wave of options. Podcast, cable TV, streaming, OTT, CTV, audio networks, smart speakers. On top of that, you need digital marketing for your website along with SEM, SEO, display, video, YouTube, email, and all the social media platforms. Look, you're the expert in your business. Wouldn't it be nice to have an expert to market you? We are Bonneville Salt Lake, the local marketing and media company you know and trust. We reach customers across all digital and social platforms and have the reach of traditional advertising available as well. We find your customer anytime, any place, anywhere on any device here in Utah or anywhere in the world. We work to optimize your results with our in-house local team of experts, providing you with qualified leads, not just impressions. Contact Stephanie Palmer at KSL for a free consultation, including a complete digital audit with no obligation or cost to you. Email spalmer@ksl.com. That's spalmer@ksl.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Dino Day. Celebrate on June 1st at all Sinclair locations. Here's Ricky Meese.
No real delays on your Salt Lake County freeways, but we do have an accident in Sandy, southbound I-15. It's after 90th South, but before the Southtown Mall. We'll call it 9800 South, over to the left shoulder. Attention Wasatch Front businesses and property managers. Have winter conditions damaged your parking lot asphalt or concrete surfaces? Call Go Pave Utah to get on their schedule. GoPaveUtah.com. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Partly cloudy today with a high of 73. Warms up for the weekend with a high of 88 on Saturday. And right now, 67 degrees and sunny. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources.
Inside Sources.
America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson.
On Utah's home for elevated conversation.
Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson. As Ukraine faces a season of heavy fighting as the war efforts against the Russian invasions drag into its third summer, Russia is assaulting the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, the nation's second largest city. And amidst some of those critical battles, political pressure and fraying relations are increasing as Ukraine, NATO, U.S. officials can't seem to agree on strategies and priorities. So we want to get an assessment. Where are we? What's the state of the battlefield? What's the political situation in Ukraine? Really pleased to have joining us on the program today Michael Birnbaum, national security reporter for the Washington Post, covering the State Department and diplomacy. Great piece in the Washington Post today titled, "As Ukraine Stumbles in War, Kyiv and Western Powers Are Struggling to Coordinate." And Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful assessment for our listeners. Just kind of give us the current lay of the land. I think people have kind of tuned out a lot of what's going on in Ukraine other than the skirmishes between mostly Republicans in Congress over the funding. But give us the lay of the land. What is actually the situation on the ground? Where are the friction and fraying points?
Well, so it's pretty tricky as we head into the summer months and the height of the fighting season. I just got back from Kyiv last week. I spent about 10 days on the ground there. I went with Secretary of State Antony Blinken when he went earlier in the month. Then I stayed behind to talk to policymakers there. There's been a lot of intense fighting. Russia has been, as you said, mounting an assault on Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, just over the border from Russia, and they've been pretty successful in pushing into Ukraine. They've kind of hit up against some defenses, so they're not moving forward right now, but they're pushing forward along other parts of the front line. And clearly, the Ukrainians are struggling. They're getting now some American military aid, but they basically had a 7-month hiatus when their ammunition stocks were dwindling as a discussion was kind of going in circles inside the U.S. Congress about whether to extend more aid. Ukrainians are frustrated with the Americans. Europeans are frustrated with the Americans and the Ukrainians. The Americans are frustrated with the Ukrainians. You know, we're more than 2 years into what's a very tough war. And although, everyone is still in partnership with each other, it feels a little bit like an unhappy marriage. The tensions are high. No one's about to break up, but there's a lot of finger pointing. So that's where we are. And the big question of the day that the Ukrainians have is, will they be allowed to use U.S. weapons to strike onto Russian soil, which they say would really help them
push back the Russian assault right now. And thus far, they've not been allowed to do so.
Yeah, and I want to unpack that just a little bit as we look at that, and I want to get your perspective, again, freshly back from Ukraine and your time there, both with Secretary Blinken, and then as you've had a chance to kind of get the lay of the land and talk to the people there. As we enter, as you said and pointed out in your piece, that we're entering this crucial summer fighting season. This is a real crucial season, both for Ukraine's effort to push Russia back and for Russia's efforts to continue to press forward. And this whole area of the Ukrainian military being able to use U.S. weapons and launch those into Russia. Give us a little bit of the lay of the land there in terms of those debates and battles going on there, and what do you see happening?
Well, so the Ukrainians have not been allowed to use U.S. weaponry to hit Russian soil. The concern on the U.S. side is that would be escalatory, that the amount of U.S. help needed to fire these weapons, to do the targeting, all of this would be interpreted by Russia as American soldiers, American intelligence being used to hit physically inside Russia. They've been worried about that. Biden has been worried about that. The Ukrainians say the Russians know this and have used that fact as a strategy to build up their forces inside Russia, but within range of Kharkiv and the areas surrounding Kharkiv, and basically have been firing on that region with impunity, knowing that the Ukrainians kind of have their hands tied behind their backs and aren't able to use the U.S. weaponry to strike back. So they've been making the argument that this doesn't make sense, that this is putting them at peril. And slowly they are winning agreement converts inside the U.S. administration here in Washington. Secretary of State Tony Blinken, upon coming back from that trip to Ukraine, I understand, made a recommendation to Biden that they should shift the policy. And that discussion about whether to make a change is underway right now.
Yeah, and I think that's such a crucial part of the conversation. Some of the military experts that we have been speaking with have talked about just how hard it is for Ukraine to make any advance or to push Russia back at all. It's sort of this ability to kind of soften up the line. Otherwise, you're kind of battling 6 inches, 3 feet at a time with trenches and landmines and all of those kinds of things that Russia has put in place. And it's impossible, it seems, to get any kind of momentum to push Russia back if you can't have some of those deeper strike capabilities, which, of course, would put those weapons onto Russian soil.
That's right. It's a really fascinating situation. I mean, the way this war has evolved, it's also depressing. In the first year of the war, there was a lot of territory traded back and forth. There are a lot of techniques, both of new techniques, old techniques. I mean, some of this warfare looks like World War I trench warfare, but at the same time, the use of drones and other kinds of new technology is really transforming the way the war is fought and actually making it very hard for either side to make breakthroughs in a way that's true now but wasn't true at the beginning of the war. And so it is hard to see major advances on either side happening anytime soon.
Yeah, and so with your perspective, having just come back from Ukraine, as you continue to have your unique perch there, looking at the State Department, what are you keeping your eye on in particular as we enter into this crucial summer fighting season?
Well, there are a couple big questions. One is, as we said, whether the United States, whether Biden ultimately allows the Ukrainians to strike inside Russia. This would help address some of the pressure on Kharkiv. There's going to be separately a meeting in Switzerland next month that the Ukrainians have been trying to assemble world leaders for, a peace conference. They want to sort of get world support for their vision of an end to the war. President Biden probably will not go to that. The Ukrainians are furious about that. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has been complaining about that publicly, but someone from the administration will go. And then, the question will be, can the Ukrainians use the military aid that will be coming from the U.S., is already coming, but will be piling up? Can they use other things from Europe, such as F-16 fighter jets, to try to start pushing back on Russia, or at least kind of firm up the lines and not lose any territory? So we'll see how that works. The thinking and hope in Washington is that the Ukrainians use this year, don't lose territory, rebuild, and are able to be in a better position next year to really make some advances. So it's a rebuilding year. It'll be a painful one.
Yeah, and that painful one is a slow one, and it's one of those that makes it really difficult to keep public support and even diplomatic support because of all of the politics of it all. Of course, the dynamics here at home and what's happening across the world as well. Very fluid, very fascinating, and again, freshly back from Ukraine, Michael Birnbaum, national security reporter for The Washington Post. It's a brilliant piece. Check it out at thewashingtonpost.com today. Michael covers the State Department and diplomacy and bird's eye view in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll step aside for a quick break. I think this is, again, it is a long, slow slog. And patience. Vladimir Putin is counting on the United States and other leaders around the world to grow weary and to run out of energy before Ukraine runs out of opportunity for freedom. That's what they're betting on, and that's what we need to make sure doesn't happen in the end. We'll be right back.
When the weather warms up, it's like a stampede, except instead of dust stirred up by hundreds of hooves, it's a cascade of phone calls to Advanced Window Products. This is Jeff Kaplan. Soon as the sun shines and the snow's gone, people want new windows and frames from Utah's #1 custom window maker, and the wait for installation grows longer. But right now, you can get near the front of the line by calling for a quote and get $2,500 off when you purchase 10 windows or more. That's on top of the incredible savings for the highest quality double-pane windows and frames, any style, any color. See, at Advanced Window Products, they actually build the windows here in Utah, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life. There's no middleman, and they can pass the savings on to you. They even offer buy now, pay later. So get in before the wait grows longer and get the $2,500 off. Get your new windows this spring. Make the call. Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100. Or visit AdvancedWindowsUSA.com.
KSL offers the best daily newsletter in the state. It's the 3 things you need to know. Every weekday, we deliver quality and relevant content to your inbox. No ads, no spam, just the 3 things you need to know to be informed about the world around you. Subscribe today. Visit KSLNewsRadio.com or text the word inbox to 57500. That's inbox to 57500.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go. Shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms, irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Family Talk with Straight Talk.
You give and you give. It's time to get with Straight Talk Wireless. You get a reliable 5G network and unlimited data, and you get to choose who joins your family plan starting as low as $25 a line. Does it have to be family? It can be family or people you like.
Get more lines and more savings. Switch to Straight Talk for family plans starting as low as $25 a line per month for 4 lines. Find us at Walmart and straighttalk.com. For network management practices, visit straighttalk.com. Family plan discount with 4 lines, all on the Silver Unlimited plan. Taxes and fees apply.
If your water heater's over 10 to 15 years old, congratulations. You've beat the average. What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Wilson with Any Hour Services, and I love hearing stories of people having water heaters that are really old and they're still doing their job. Unfortunately, most of us won't be that lucky. And when water heaters fail, it's usually in spectacularly inconvenient fashion. Whether it's an unexpected cold shower when we're already running late for work, or worse yet, coming home to a flooded basement, it's never fun. If you'd like to look into replacing your water heater before it fails, Any Hour Services is having a sale for any homeowners listening. Whether you're looking for a new tanked water heater or you want to see what upgrading to a tankless would cost, the plumbers at Any Hour Services can show you what options are available. And right now, you can save $400 on a tanked water heater or $1,200 on a tankless. If you think you might be interested, call Any Hour Services today and schedule your free estimate. 801-443-7400. You can Google Any Hour Services. You can even schedule online at anyhourservices.com. No one helps more homeowners than Any Hour Services.
For over 22 years, speaking on business on KSL News Radio has been a beloved tradition, celebrating our heroic business leaders and Utah consumers who have helped build one of the strongest state economies in the nation. Now, under the stewardship of the Salt Lake Chamber and hosted by Chamber President and CEO Derek Miller, the program continues to shine a spotlight on those who make Utah's business environment dynamic and thriving. With his expertise and passion, Derek brings the stories of our business community to life. As part of the Salt Lake Chamber, Speaking on Business is proud to continue its legacy of highlighting inspiring stories, trends, and special guests. Support Utah businesses now and be part of Utah's thriving economy. More information can be found at slchamber.com. That's slchamber.com.
With the three things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, a court in Boise planning to announce the verdict in the Chad Daybell murder case at 2 o'clock this afternoon. KSL News Radio will carry that announcement live. Second, the nation waiting for a jury verdict in the hush money trial for former President Trump. And third, the first rabid bat of the season turned up in Utah, with state health officials urging caution if you come across bats. 67 degrees, sunny in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It is great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson. And, throughout our history here in this state, pioneers have dared to challenge the status quo, fight for equality, and help create a more just society. And among those great trailblazers here in the state of Utah, Martha Hughes Cannon, of course, Utah's first female state senator, relentless champion of women's suffrage. And now she gets to go to Washington again. And we're really thrilled. Martha's going to Washington, and the lieutenant governor has come into our studio. Deidre Henderson joins us live today. Welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks, Boyd. I kind of feel like we need to talk about those rabid bats.
We'll leave those for we may have you come back for a full segment on rabid bats, but we'll save that for a different day. We'll give Martha her day in the sun. We know that this beautiful statue, I think it's a powerful statue. When I look at the statue that's been created for Martha Hughes Cannon, it is one of real power. Like, you just sense that leadership, that courage, and that vision. And so as you've been watching this over the last several years, of course, it got slowed down during the pandemic. Now we're on the cusp of actually sending her to Washington. Give us some of your thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, you know what? She is a strong woman, and the statue, I think, shows that. She has a really strong bearing. This has been a really exciting project for me, for a lot of people in the state of Utah, and it's 6 years in the making. Yeah. We started this back in 2018 with the legislation that would allow us to swap out one of our two statues in the nation's Capitol building with Martha Hughes Cannon. And the reason that that's so important is because Martha, as you mentioned, was not just the first woman elected to a state senate in Utah. She was the first woman in the United States elected to a state senate. And that was 24 years before most women in the United States even had the right to vote.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm. So she stands for something far more than just the incredible woman that she was, and she was an incredible woman, but she stands for something even bigger and better and broader, and people don't know this story.
Yeah.
And Utah's history has been forgotten, and it's time people remembered.
And I'm so glad you raised it in that context, because I've always said that we miss a lot when we introduce people by their resumes. And so you can go with Martha Hughes Cannon. It's a long resume. All of those things we've just been going through. But that wasn't really what made her or what she really represents. It's those principles that really drove and propelled things that ultimately became great accomplishments. But what are some of the principles that you saw as you have kind of looked at her life and legacy? What are the principles that really make Martha Hughes Cannon tick that we should be celebrating and that we should be emulating?
Well, Martha had that broad vision. She was someone who fought for women's rights, women's suffrage rights, voting rights, women's equality here in the state of Utah a long time ago, before most women had them, as we mentioned. But she also understood that the story of women's suffrage here in Utah is not just about Utah women. It's about the advancement, the betterment of all people everywhere. So when we lift everyone in our sphere that can be lifted, we're really lifting everyone. And that's the story that she perpetuates. That's the message I think that this statue sends. When people go and see this woman in the nation's capital, tourists go and they see this statue, they'll be reminded that Utah led out. Utah wasn't we kind of get a bad reputation, right? We have this bad, and yet we were the leaders. And when Utah women got the right to vote, they didn't just say, "Okay, good, thanks,
we're good
enough." They fought for those rights for other women as well. That shows us we have a great past. We still have a long way to go, but it's important to know where we came from so that we can know where we're going.
Yeah, no question about that. And it was so important. And again, it was Utah model being shipped to our nation's capital and beyond. Even back then, they weren't content just for women here in the state of Utah. They got that right to vote, but they pushed that whole thing forward. And we know that the statue that's been created of Martha Hughes Cannon has been up at the Utah State Capitol. You alluded to the fact that every state in the nation gets two statues in the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., and we had to swap one out, but he was sort of an Idahoan anyway.
Yeah, Philo's a great guy.
Great guy. We like Philo Farnsworth. We're all happy we have TVs today.
Yeah, the other one's Brigham Young. We couldn't really swap him out,
yeah.
So we're trading places with Philo. He'll have a nice place of honor at the new engineering building at Utah Valley University. But Martha's in the Utah State Capitol building right now for another week. Mm-hmm. People can go and see her. And then on Wednesday, June 5th, we're going to have a send-off, a big party. Anybody who wants to in the state of Utah can come see this beautiful statue for the last time here in the state, wish her a fond farewell. It'll be a great party from 5 to 8 p.m. on the south steps of the Capitol building on Wednesday, June 5th. And there'll be games, there'll be entertainment, music, there'll be food trucks. It'll be a great night.
All the good stuff. All the good Utah things.
Yes, absolutely.
So again, Wednesday the 5th, 5 p.m., is that what you said?
5 to 8.
5 to 8 p.m. You can go just up to the Capitol there on the steps and do the big send-off as we send Martha Hughes Cannon back to Washington, D.C. And again, so important, so ahead of her time. Utah was ahead of the nation's time in terms of bringing those rights to women. And it wasn't just a seat at the table, it was a voice at the table that I think we're still working on and still trying to do even better. And we all have an opportunity to follow in that footsteps. We've got a primary election season coming up super fast here. 25th of June is the primary election, but we know we've got ballots dropping soon as well.
That's right. Ballots go out on June 4th next week. So those ballots will be landing in people's mailboxes. And it's not too late. If you're not registered or you've moved, it's not too late. You can register to vote until June 14th. You can request a mail-in ballot until June 18th. And then if, for some reason something happens, you forgot to register, you can actually show up to an early voting location, bring 2 forms of ID. You can show up on election day in person, bring 2 forms of ID, and register there. But most people will be getting their ballots, and it's really important to get those turned back in. A lot of important races on the ballot this year.
Yeah, really important races going on as we march our way through 2024. I think it's significant that those ballots are leaving just before Martha Hughes Cannon leaves the building.
Yes.
That voting right is a sacred right. We talk about it in those terms, and it is part of that civic responsibility, that civic duty to not just vote, but to be an informed voter. To take that seriously because every voice matters, every vote counts, and a lot of the things that I think Utah, again, has led out on in terms of integrity and security and transparency so people can actually have confidence in the process as well.
Absolutely. We have done, and as Lieutenant Governor, I'm the chief election officer of the state. I don't run elections. The county clerks run the elections. I don't ever touch a ballot except for my own. But we have put these processes in place, and it's really important that the public understands if they have any questions about how our elections are run, they can find information at vote.utah.gov. They can call their county clerk, and their county clerk would be delighted to give them a tour of their voting center, show them what the processes are. Even more importantly, when those ballots are being processed and counted, they can show up and they can, as just a member of the public, go watch all of that happening. Or they can become a poll watcher, a poll worker, and they can help with that process as well. Also, really quick, if you want to track your ballot, if you want to know when your ballot's being sent out, when it has been processed and that vote has been counted, go to ballottracks.utah.gov. That's 2 T's, 2 L's, and 1 X. Ballottracks.utah.gov. Sign up, and you'll get text messages so you'll know where your ballot is.
Oh, I love that. The fact that we can actually track our ballot from the time we get it, mark it, mail it, and watch it go through the whole process. And that's why we should have confidence in the process so we can trust the results as well. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, as always, great to have you in studio today. We'll look forward to next Wednesday when Martha Hughes Cannon, that statue, heads towards our nation's capital and takes a right and proper place in the United States Capitol. That's an important thing. And then everyone be watching your mailbox. Ballots will be dropping on Wednesday next week. Also happens to be my wife's birthday, so we'll just note that for the file. That's more for me than for anyone else. But be ready to vote starting next week, June the 4th. Ballots will start hitting. That wraps up hour number 1 for us here on Inside Sources. We'll step aside for some top-of-the-hour news. Much more to come. Stick around. We'll be right back.
KSL FM Midvale.
KSL Salt Lake City.
From the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios, this is KSL News Radio.
Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomas. KSL's top story this hour. The jury has reached a verdict in the case of Chad Daybell. We're expecting an announcement from the court at any moment. Daybell is charged with 3 counts of murder in the deaths of 2 children, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, and his first wife, Tammy Daybell. His second wife, Lori Vallow Daybell, has already been convicted in the case and sentenced to life in prison. Chad could be facing the death penalty if he's convicted. There's been no verdict yet in the hush money trial of former President Donald Trump in New York City. We'll bring that to you as soon as it happens. Summertime is coming. Common to get more reports of rabid bats around. Utah public health officials confirmed the first report of rabies in a bat found earlier this month. An epidemiologist for the Utah Department of Health and Human Services, Karen Valcarce, says summertime's has shown an influx in reporting of rabid animals, probably because there are more people around.
People are out more and about during the summer. They're more likely to come into contact with wildlife because they're recreating outside.
In Utah, the primary carrier of rabies is bats. If you come into contact or suspect that an animal is rabid, you can contact your local animal control office. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average down on the day now, 330 points. The NASDAQ, 183 points down. And our KSL weather, things are going to warm up tomorrow. That's next. KSL News Time, 2:01.
Here's a way to get breaking news updates anywhere you go.
At the store or in a work meeting, you can get breaking news on your phone.
You can quickly read it, swipe, or click for more. It's super discreet, super fast.
That's the app for KSL News Radio.
At Fisher Investments, we may seem like other money managers, but we're different.
Are you really that different than the rest of us?
We are. As a fiduciary, we always focus on what's best for our clients.
What services do you offer besides investing?
We have a team of specialists in financial planning, estate planning, and more.
Your clients rely on you for all that?
Yes, we ensure clients receive unparalleled service at every step of the relationship.
Okay, but you still sell commission-based products, right?
No, because we believe that's a conflict of interest. We prioritize service over sales goals.
So, then how do your fees work?
We have a simple and transparent fee that's a percentage of our clients' portfolios. So we do better when our clients do better.
Wow, we're more different than I thought.
At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different. Learn more at fisherinvestments.com.
Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
I'm Jason Walton, candidate for U.S. Senate. I'm recording from the Tucson sector of our southern border, and nobody's here. Our government should defend our territory, but President Biden, Mitch McConnell, and career politicians are funding war in other countries while the cartels are waging unchecked war here on American soil. I'm standing up to build the wall, end catch and release, and secure the border. Stand with me.
I'm Jason Walton. The cost of food, gas, and interest rates have all risen because career politicians are addicted to spending, causing the federal debt to go up and our money's value to go down. My opponents are all big spending career politicians, but I'll stop runaway inflation by passing a balanced budget amendment.
Breaking news, we are awaiting the verdict. The verdict has been made. The judge has just taken his seat up in Idaho. Becky Bruce joins us live in studio.
Yeah, we're still waiting for the court to get totally settled here, but they just had the all-rise moment as the judge walked into the courtroom. This is, of course, the trial of Chad Daybell, accused of murdering his first wife, Tammy Daybell, and two of his second wife's children, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Can we listen in and hear if they've started?
The judge is just logging into his computer. He
Okay.
told everyone in the courtroom, I'm just logging in.
So we get to shuck and jive a little bit here. So the long story short is this has been 4 years in the making, right? These children's bodies were found during 2020. And the initial report that came in of them missing was from 2019, so actually closer to 5.
Yeah, this has been a very long, painful journey for so many, the family, the community, as we've watched all of this play out. And Becky, you've been following this obviously from a news standpoint. And, of course, KSL News Radio has been all over this in terms of coverage over all of the trial. Anything that you're sensing or anything in your conversations with some of our experts here and other places in terms of what we might be expecting to hear today?
Yeah, I had some good conversations with our friend Greg Skordas, KSL's legal analyst and co-host of KSL at Night.
And looks like the judge is speaking now. We'll go to that live in the courtroom in Idaho, the Daybell trial.
The jury has reached a verdict. The court will note the parties are present, the state's present with Mr. Wood, Ms. Blake, Mr. Wixom, and Ms. Beatty. Mr. Pryor's here representing the defendant, Mr. Daybell, and the court at this time is going to instruct the jurors to please be brought into the courtroom. That will include our alternate jurors as well to be seated. And then I will have the marshal get the verdict form from the jury once they return to the courtroom. So if they can come in at this time, we'll have them brought in.
So we're listening to live coverage from the courtroom in Idaho. The judge has just instructed that the jury that has reached a verdict in the Chad Daybell case be brought into the room along with the alternate jurors and that they be seated as well.
So what I was about to say is Greg Skordas, our KSL legal analyst, was telling me a verdict back this soon likely means that they've reached consensus on guilty on all counts. And there were a lot of counts for them to go through, and they had to have consensus across the board.
Yeah, it has to get that unanimous decision there by the jury. And so we are watching that. We're watching live coverage. You're joining us here on KSL News Radio of the Chad Daybell trial in Idaho. The jury is just walking in. All are standing, including the judge, as the jury and the alternates are brought in and seated. Everyone is back down. We'll go back to the judge live in Idaho.
All right, the court's going to next just make a reference that there is a courtroom conduct order in effect in this proceeding to remain in effect. So I appreciate everyone complying with that order, as most of you have done throughout the proceedings in this case. At this time, then, the first matter I'd like to take up is to do a roll call of the jury for the record. So, Madam Clerk, if you could please conduct a roll call of our jury to make sure they're all present and properly seated at this time.
Juror number 1, red card number 27. Juror number 2, red card number 219. Juror number 4, red card number 631. Juror number 5, red card number 653. Juror number 7, red card number 752.
Present.
Juror number 8, red card 1680.
Present.
Juror number 9, red card number 823.
Here.
Juror number 10, red card 1358.
Present.
Juror number 11, red card 1365. Juror number 12, red card 716.
Present.
Juror number 14, red card 997.
Present.
And juror number 15, red card 1078.
All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for conducting the roll call. All right, at this time, I'm next going to inquire from the jury foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? All right, thank you. Mr. Bailiff, if you would please retrieve the verdict from the jury foreperson.
Bailiff walking over now with the verdict on paper.
The judge has received the verdict from the jury and from the bailiff and is
All right, the
just
court
reading
has
through
reviewed
again
the
to
verdict
announce it.
form. I'll note that all counts have been properly marked, as well as the verdict form's been properly dated and signed by the foreperson. The next step then is Mr. Daybell, if you and counsel would please rise, I'm going to have the clerk read the verdict.
In the District Court of the 7th Judicial District of the State of Idaho and in for the County of Fremont. State of Idaho Plaintiff versus Chad Guy Daybell Defendant, case number CR 22211623. Verdict. We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn to try the above entitled action for our verdict, unanimously answer the questions submitted to us as follows. Question number 1. In regards to count 1 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan and grand theft by deception? Guilty. Question number 2. In regards to count 2 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan? Guilty. Question number 3. In regards to count 3 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow and grand theft by deception? Guilty. Question number 4. In regards to count 4 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow? Guilty. Question number 5. In regards to count 5 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tamara Tammy Daybell? Guilty. Question number 6. In regards to count 6 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of first-degree murder of Tamara Tammy Daybell? Guilty. Question number 7. In regards to count 7 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of insurance fraud? Guilty. Question number 8. In regards to count 8 of the amended indictment, in regards to count 9 of the amended indictment, is Chad Guy Daybell not guilty or guilty of insurance fraud? Guilty. Dated this 30th day of May, 2024, and signed by the presiding juror.
So, Boyd, that is guilty on all
right,
counts.
Madam Clerk, thank you for reading the verdict. At this time, I'm just going to collectively ask the jurors, all of you, is this in fact your unanimous verdict on each of those counts? Very well. At this time, I'm going to inquire if the parties wish to have the jury polled. Does the state wish to have the jury polled?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Does the defense, Mr. Pryor, wish to have the jury polled?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Very well, then. I'm going to direct the clerk to record the verdict. At this time, then, this does conclude the guilt phase of this trial. because the defendant has been convicted on counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, the state has filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty, and so a second phase of this trial, called the sentencing phase, will be taking place next. We're going to take a recess at this time for approximately an hour. We will come back on the record and begin with the start of that sentencing phase of the trial. I would like to remind everyone that this courtroom conduct order is still in application throughout these proceedings. Thank you all for complying with that. We are going to take that recess at this time. Mr. Daybell is to remain in custody at this time for the commencement of the sentencing phase. And with that, thank you all, and we will be in recess.
The judge just said they are in recess. The judge making that announcement and certifying that the jury had come to a unanimous conclusion on all 8 charges against Chad Daybell. Also noted that they will take about a 1-hour recess and that they would then come back and begin that sentencing phase and process, noting the intent of the state to seek the death penalty in this case. I think that's a significant portion, Becky Bruce.
Yeah, that's actually kind of a surprise. So our internal legal analyst, Greg Skordas, was telling me he expected, based on how this judge has done every other part of this trial, him to be very methodical and stretch out the timeline for every single part, including the sentencing phase. So he was kind of expecting us to hear that there would be a gap of some weeks between now and when that sentencing phase would begin, and to hear that it's going to start in an hour is really a surprise.
Yeah.
I think that tells us that he expects both sides have already done all of the preparation that they need to have done.
Yeah, fascinating. I thought it was also interesting that the judge also noted and reminded everyone of the code of conduct inside the room there at the court, that decorum needs to be maintained. Again, I'm sure there are some sighs of relief, some of joy, some just exasperation, some hoping that this is just the beginning of the end, and yet that, to your point, Becky, that the judge is going so rapidly to move into this next phase, I think is significant.
Yeah, especially when he's been so methodical and deliberate up to this point. I mean, there were multiple points where he could have rushed things and didn't, and then now all of a sudden it feels kind of fast. Yeah. But the verdict was fast too, and that was also a surprise.
Yeah, and so we're going to continue to watch that over the course of the next hour. We had been getting some word early on that there is likely to be press conferences taking place outside the courthouse. It will be interesting to see whether they do those during this recess period right now or whether they wait until this first phase of the sentencing begins.
Yeah, and our Adam Small is actually there in the courtroom, so we're hoping now that we're in this recess, we might be able to connect with him.
Actually, we do have Adam on the phone as we speak. And Adam, you were there in the courtroom. We can see you on the screen. Give us a sense of what it was like in the room as the announcement, guilty verdict on all 8 counts against Chad Daybell. What was the reaction in the room?
Well, boy, leading up to that verdict for a good 20 minutes, you could hear a pin drop, yet there was not an empty seat in this very large courtroom. And then as those charges and that verdict was read, you could just hear some collective exhales from so many victims, police officers, people that have been involved in this case, connected and affected by this for years. Your exhales, people begin to cry in some sense of relief, probably some closure. And Chad just kind of kept his eyes forward. I actually saw the attorneys walk out into the hallway before Judge Boyce came in and the verdict was read. And I don't know if they maybe got a sense of what was coming, but I could see Chad talking with his attorney beforehand, just nodding his head. And there's a part of me that thinks they probably knew what was coming, and I think Chad just had kind of tried to accept it.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the jury came back so swiftly, I think that had to be indicative of the fact that they had come to that unanimous decision on those counts with the guilty verdict. Any surprise there? Becky, Bruce, and I here in studio, we're surprised that the judge is moving so swiftly into this next phase. Of course, he noted that the state would be pursuing the death penalty. As part of that, most had thought that this would be a little slower, a little longer process.
Yeah, I was surprised too, honestly, because Judge Boyce, I mean, it's a little unpredictable, but I mean, he has been pretty consistent in the sense that he takes, doesn't do too much in one day, maybe sometimes like to take a day off in between here and there. But when he said that, yeah, we're going right into the penalty phase of this in an hour from now, I was honestly just as surprised as everyone else, but I mean, I'm definitely going to keep my feet on the ground here up on the 4th floor of the Ada County Courthouse, making sure I can be in the courtroom for that. But it's all I can say is all the people, as I've even gotten to know Larry and Kay Woodcock, just chatting in between sessions. I can imagine the relief and the closure that they're starting to feel after years of anguish and pain that's been caused by this case.
Yeah, and real quick, Adam, before I let you continue on with your reporting up there, anything in terms of we had heard some rumblings that there may be some press conferences, and is there any anticipation that those press conferences on either side would take place during this 1-hour recess, or is that more likely to happen later in the day today?
Well, that is a great question. I'm actually going to go downstairs or connect with some of my other colleagues on the ground here just to make sure. If they are, we'll make sure to bring them to you live, but I actually just stepped out like 2 minutes ago, so I've got a little bit of figuring out to do myself. But obviously, I'll keep everyone updated as best I can here.
All right, we'll let you go do that part of the job. We'll check back in with Adam very shortly up there live from Idaho. Really pleased to have Greg Skordas joining us in studio. Greg, as always, great to have your perspective on this. The speed, the unanimity of all 8 counts, and then seeking the death penalty and immediately going in after a short recess into the next phase. Any of those surprising to you?
It's very surprising that they're going straight to the death penalty phase, because it's a separate trial altogether, and the state would have different witnesses for that. The defense would have different witnesses for that, and you would expect that the judge would give each side time to gear up, because nobody knew what the verdict was going to be, let alone go straight to sentencing. Even if a person is just sentenced for a regular murder, if there is such a thing, you get a pre-sentence report. It takes about 2 months to get that done. And so in this case, the rare type of case where the jury actually decides the punishment, it only happens in death penalty cases in America. Otherwise, the judge decides punishment. But they're putting the jury right back into that boiling pan, if you will, and they're going to have the penalty phase. So it surprises me because, I don't know, does the defense have all their witnesses lined up? Have they subpoenaed everyone that they're bringing in for the penalty phase? Who knows? That surprises me.
So explain that for our listeners just a little bit, Greg, in terms of the fact that with a death penalty case, that the jury actually makes that decision, not the judge. So break that down for us a little bit. And then just the fact that we are going so swiftly into that, is the judge also sending a message and saying, hey, we're not going to wait around. We're going to start right into this?
I think so. I think that's exactly what he's doing. So the jury will then go back after they hear the evidence of aggravating and mitigating factors. And those are things, Boyd, like, maybe his high school teacher or some friends, or maybe his children will testify. He was a great father. He did this or that. We go into that, and then the jury goes back and they deliberate. But the issue for the jury at that point, and again, it has to be unanimous, just like the guilt part was, should he get the death penalty? And if they can't agree, if one person holds out and says, I don't think he should get the death penalty, they can then say we should give him life in prison without the possibility of parole, or just a life sentence altogether.
Can you talk about kind of the standards that they're evaluating there? Because my understanding from talking to you before is when you're considering, after this person has been convicted, whether they deserve the death penalty or not, it's not whether you agree with the death penalty. It's more of a function of, did they meet this particular standard in this particular charge?
No, you're exactly right, Becky. And so when the jury was picked in this case, they had to agree that if push came to shove, they would impose the penalty of death. So if you're selected for a jury like this, or you're going to be, and you say, I absolutely cannot impose a death penalty, then you absolutely cannot serve on the jury, if that makes any sense. So the jury they don't have to say I'm in favor of or I like it. They just have to say, I will follow the law. And the law in the state of Idaho is that the penalty of death is appropriate in certain circumstances. So they'll go back and they'll have to weigh those circumstances, the aggravating and the mitigating factors to Chad, to his whole life, not just to the crime, just who he is, and whether or not this would apply. Of course, he has no prior record. That's going to come into play. I mean, these are horrible crimes. There are 3 deaths. That's about as aggravating as you could imagine. There are 2 children. Again, another aggravating factor. Who knows what the jury will decide in this case.
Yeah. If you're just joining us on KSL News Radio, we've been covering live from the state of Idaho. The jury has come back in the Chad Daybell case, guilty on all 8 counts. Unanimous verdict there by the jury. The The judge then set the court into recess for just 1 hour, which I thought was very stunning. I said they will move on to that next phase, and we've got our own Adam Small and team up there in Idaho. Becky, as we look at the coverage and what we know at this point, anything else standing out to you in terms of what our listeners should be thinking about in context of this case?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. The defense really did their best, I thought, to raise some reasonable doubt specifically around the death of Tammy Daybell, right? They brought in their own forensic examiner to go through autopsy results and re-examine all of the evidence there. And I think they were trying, if nothing else, to just create that little bit of a shadow of doubt that maybe it wasn't Chad or he wasn't fully involved. You know, did he actually do the act himself, or was there some other mitigating factor? And with the verdict coming back as quick as it did, I think it's pretty clear the jury didn't buy it.
Yeah, and Greg Skordas, of course, who we always look to in situations like this. Greg, from your unique perch as you've watched this whole thing play out, kind of take us through some of the ebbs and flows in terms of the case that was made by the state, the defense, what case they made, and ultimately what you think was the tipping point in terms of the jury, again, coming back so swiftly and so forcefully in terms of the result.
So I think you have to go back a year, and I won't go back a full year, but Lori's trial was a year ago, and it was the same, very similar evidence, although hers wasn't a death penalty case, and she was found guilty in fairly short order. Now, her attorneys argued from the beginning, this is a weak case, you're not going to find her guilty. They didn't put on any witnesses. Chad had the benefit of hindsight. His attorneys knew that the state did have a case, that they were going to put on a strong case, and so they put on their own case. And they did, like Becky said, they actually put on a forensic expert, a medical examiner, to say, hey, wait a minute, you can't really conclude that Tammy was murdered here. It could have just as likely been natural causes. And so that was the one count, Becky, that I was sort of waiting when the jury was reading its verdict. Like Boyd said, the quick verdict was not good for Chad. But when they got to count 6, that was the only time I sort of held my breath. Are they going to find guilt on Tammy? And they did. And if you recall, earlier today, the jury sent out a question to the judge and said, we don't know what the rule is with respect to Tammy. And they realized, this is horrible, that they hadn't given the jury a jury instruction on the death of Tammy. So the judge had to start over and bring them all back in, read another jury instruction to them. That's incredibly odd and awkward and just embarrassing, I think, for the court and the prosecutors that they didn't bother to cover that one. But yeah, the judge read that, which told me the jury had probably decided everything else. They just weren't sure what they were supposed to do on Tammy.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, I was also struck by, we talked earlier on in the trial, there was a moment where the defense did what I think was a probably procedural thing, where they tried to get a verdict early from the judge right before presenting their case. So one of the key hiccups there was that the paperwork had the wrong date of death for one of the 2 children on it. How big a deal was that? Was it nothing?
Well, again, that's the same thing, Becky. The state and the judge didn't dot their I's and cross their T's in some fashion as you would have expected. I mean, they were very prepared. Their arguments were great. Their witnesses were there. But the minutia, just the jury instructions, having the charging document correct with the right dates, they had that wrong. And once you close your case, you're the state, we rest, we're done. There's kind of a King's X at that part. And the defense said, hey, you didn't cover this base. You had the wrong date. So we want that count dismissed. The judge said, well, it was a clerical error. We're going to open it up again. We're going to let that in. Same with the jury instructions. I'm sure the defense said, hey, judge, you read the instructions. You don't get to read them again. But again, they did. Or there was appeal issues. We'll see. But the judge did what he thought was right to cure both of those problems. Again, embarrassing problems that you would not expect in a high-profile death penalty case, but the judge did what he thought was best to cure them.
Yeah, on that element of appeal, do either of those things really rise to that level? Do you think there's much of a case there? How do you see that playing out? And again, you talked a little bit about the defense being able to prepare for this next phase. Are they going to push back, coming back an hour later and starting that whole thing? Are we likely to see requests for delay and also the appeal issue?
The fact that the judge set the penalty phase in an hour and the defense sort of sitting there saying, okay, see you in an hour, makes me think that the judge had already set this, that everyone knew if the verdict was guilty, we're going straight to penalty phase. So I think the defense is on guard that they know that they're going to penalty phase and that we're going to start that at 3:30 today or whatever. Yeah. That could take days. It could take hours. Who knows how long it's going to take. In terms of appeals, as you know, Boyd, and you've been around a little bit like I have, when you have a death penalty case, they're appealed forever. Yeah. I mean, we're getting people on death row in the Intermountain West that have been there for decades. So yeah, he'll go through the whole gamut of the Idaho Appeals Court, the Idaho Supreme Court, the 10th Circuit, perhaps the United States Supreme Court. They'll look at every mistake this defense attorney or the judge or the prosecutor could have made, and they'll have a series of lawyers who focus solely on death penalty cases, who may not even know Chad at this moment in time, and they're going to look through this case and make sure that he was given a fair trial in every respect, because there's no turning back once you impose the penalty of death.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg, I know you've told me before about your experience with death penalty cases here in Utah. I wonder if you could walk us through kind of what the next step is for both sides. Like, what is the prosecution doing right now, and what is the defense doing?
So they've got the jury teed up, and the jury has said he's guilty. So now it becomes aggravating versus mitigating. What is aggravating about him? And they're going to tell the jury, if you're ever going to impose a death penalty, this is the person. There are 3 deaths, 2 children, and really, and just the way the children were found and everything. I'm sure they're going to show photos. I mean, there's sort of the gloves come off, and all the gory details now are very relevant. They are. Chad, I mean, and I've told you this before, Becky, that, I mean, he's otherwise a guy who's led a fairly exemplary life. And I think that they're going to bring people in, people that know him, his neighbors, his own children, again, who testified and say, there are some redeeming things about him. Yes, he did this, and we're all going to have to live with that. The people who are testifying are going to say, we understand the verdict, but don't take this man's life away. You know, consider the good thing that he's done. The you know, whether he's been a teacher, whether he's been an educator for his Sunday school or whatever he's done, you know, helping people, coaching his kids' baseball team, whatever. All those things now are relevant. They have nothing to do with guilt, but they have everything in the world to do with punishment. So yes, bring in his 5th grade teacher who said he carried somebody's books to school every day. You know, you got to throw out everything when you're the defense and you're trying to save somebody's life.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, the verdict has come in the Chad Daybell case up in Idaho. We've got coverage up there. Our own Adam Small is reporting and has gone out of the courtroom and is doing a little bit of reporting. We'll get Adam back on the line shortly. We also have Greg Skordas in studio with us, along with Becky Bruce, as we break this down for you. Again, the verdict came back rather swiftly from the jury, unanimous on all 8 charges. That he was found guilty. There's a 1-hour recess. We're expecting the judge to reconvene at about 3:15, about 3:15 Utah time. And so we'll keep our eye on that part of it. And Greg, as we kind of do this reset, you alluded to the appeals process and how many cases, death row appeals we have, some that have been there for decades. What should we glean from that in terms of where we are as a society, and what should we be thinking about in the context of these death penalty cases?
You know, that's a great question, Boyd. And I've done death penalty cases from both sides. I've been a prosecutor and I've been a defense attorney on death penalty cases, and they're gut-wrenching. And you realize when you have a person who's executed 20 years after the homicide that I know this will sound weird, you're almost not executing the same person anymore. You know, you put him in prison, you educate him, you get him a college degree, you get him some life skills, you do this and that, and then we execute him. But it is the law of the land, and some states have it and some don't. And there was a time when it was the Supreme Court of the United States said it was cruel and unusual punishment, and then it came back. I think Gary Gilmore was the first one for decades, or at least for some period of time. But Utah still has it. The feds have now introduced it into some federal cases, and the state of Idaho follows Utah's. I mean, or we follow theirs, but ours are very, very similar. But to answer your question, the fact that it does take so long, the good and bad, the good is you have to afford that person who's on death row every possible appeal. Yeah. The bad is that ends up taking a lot of time. And like I say, it's for the victim's family, they're sitting there going, well, when are we going to see justice? Keep in mind, he's not going to be free. So there's some sign of justice just by the fact that he'll be incarcerated for the next 10 or 20 years. Yeah. And then maybe that penalty will ultimately be imposed on him.
I think there's so many interesting, complex questions within that. The justice delayed for the families and the fact that they have to watch each of those appeals take time and they can become very public, and it rehashes everything, brings things back. I don't mean to interrupt you, but Larry Woodcock, the grandfather of Tylee and JJ, at the beginning of the trial, if you recall, said, I almost hope he doesn't get the death penalty because I would just as soon he sat in prison and thought about what he's done for the rest of his life. I mean, put big picture of Tammy in his cell. Put a big picture of Tylee in his cell. You know what I mean? Yeah. Let him think about it. I mean, Chad's not an old man. He's going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
And so there's some benefit there too. But the jury might also think, 3 strikes, you're out.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to impose a death penalty on Chad Daybell, who do you have?
Who does that actually apply to? Yeah. And I think it's also interesting. I want to dig in just real quick, Greg, on kind of the flip side of that. That if it's 20 years down the line and we're still going through appeals process, he won't be the same person that he is right now. That's a whole nother complexity that I think we have to grapple with as a society.
Right. He may very well be repentant by then. He may have come to terms with everything that he's done. He may want to do some good, even from within the prison. Teach other inmates, work with other inmates who can't read, further himself and do what he can. But again, Idaho has a fairly swift death penalty. They're not going to waste a lot of time. I'm sure they're moving forward. I mean, these 2 trials moved pretty quickly. The verdict, the death penalty phase is starting in 45 minutes. I mean, my word, I've never heard of such a thing. So, yeah, I mean, and I was telling Becky when we were getting ready for this, when I was up in Idaho a couple of weeks ago, one of the members of the public actually brought a yearbook to the courtroom. She showed me a picture of Chad, and he's wearing his Glee Club sweater or something. It just looks like this nicest guy in the world. And I told Becky, if I was a defense attorney, I'd blow that up. I would have that picture life size in front of the jury and say, is this really the kind of person we want to be executing in the state of Idaho?
Yeah. I think there's also an interesting angle here, Greg, that not a lot of the public would maybe know about. And I'm not sure how much Idaho mirrors Utah in this respect. But effectively, we have, I think it's 7 death row inmates here who are not actually on death row. Well, one of them is.
Yeah.
He's exhausted his appeals. But the other 6 are in Gen Pop. And if you're a victim's family, does that feel like justice? On the same token, from a criminology standpoint, how do you not give people the opportunity to earn some better status within prison? Because what motivation would they have to behave otherwise?
Yeah, and I've heard that argument, and the public will say, well, he's in prison, he's hanging out with other inmates, he's enjoying meals and showers. But, I mean, I've visited the prison a number of times. It's horrible. Every minute you spend in something like that is horrible. So if there's any recompense or any sort of justice for the families, it's at least the knowledge that the person is not free. I mean, they're not going to go home tonight and enjoy a nice meal with their wife and kids. They're not going to walk the streets this weekend and enjoy the beautiful weather we have here. I mean, they're locked up. In prison, people tell me, boy, I never want to go to prison again. It's horrible. I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to
It's
be.
supposed to be.
It is horrible. It's horrible for a reason.
Yeah. Greg, let's look at something, because you've been in the middle of these kinds of cases. You understand the defense and what they've gone through. Is the defense having an exhale moment, or are they immediately trying to shift gears into that penalty phase? The prosecution, where are they? I mean, they've basically been given an hour to be ready to go, and as you alluded to, the judge probably gave them a heads up that you better be ready. I'm not going to wait around if these are guilty verdicts.
The defense is going through the worst time, Boyd, that a defense attorney can do in their entire career, and that is the onus is on you now to save a man's life. There are very few times in your career that you're asked to do that. But that's exactly what happens in a death penalty case. I mean, 5 years in prison, 10 years in prison, 20 years in prison. This is, let's see how you can do at saving a man's life. And that's a tough call. And for any defense attorney, that's a kind of pressure that is overwhelming, just completely overwhelming. And that's why I'm surprised the judge is pushing them to the penalty phase so quickly.
I know we've talked about this before at length, Greg, but I come back to it again now that we have guilty on all counts for Chad Daybell, and that is, why in the world, as a defense attorney, wouldn't you have tried to plead this down at some point in this process before we got here?
I'm sure there were discussions. I'm sure there were negotiations. I wouldn't even doubt if he came to the state and said, we'll serve life in prison, just get this over with. But I don't know. I don't know where the plea bargaining was. This may have been one of those cases, Becky, where the state said,
it's death or nothing, because, yes, they had to go to trial. Now, Lori's case was different because she was incompetent at times and probably wasn't even capable of making a decision whether to plead guilty. And her attorneys thought she was going to be acquitted anyway. Chad's attorneys knew his attorney knew that this was an uphill battle. I'm sure he was begging the state before trial to allow Chad life in prison.
Fascinating. And as you look at the kind of the ripple effect now, again, you've been in those chairs, you've been sitting behind those closed doors. What's the conversation going on with the attorneys and Chad Daybell as they look at this next phase of it? And then what are the conversations that happen with the families, kind of the those that you might be on the representation side in terms of their kind of joy and exhale that this part is over, but kind of steeling them for what's still to come?
Right. And we've also got a family, Boyd, of Tammy, who are not only the victim's children, but the defendant's children. Yeah. And what role do they play in this? Certainly with respect to the people that were the caretakers of Tylee and JJ, the Woodcocks and others who cared about them, who were their family, who lost these children, they'll be asked how they want to proceed. And they'll be able to tell the jury, here's what we think. Here's what we think you should do. Here's what's appropriate. But when you get to the death of Tammy and you're dealing with, I mean, talk about an uncomfortable position to be in. Dad killed mom. So what do you feel bad for mom, or do you feel wanting to help dad? I was surprised that his children testified for him. And I'm sure they're going to testify at the penalty phase the same way and say, look, notwithstanding what you decided, jury, he took us camping. He took us fishing. He taught us how to read. You know, he taught us right from wrong. You know, he bought me my first car and taught me how to drive. And, you know, he was a good dad. He did some good things. But he killed mom. You know what I mean? I don't know how you balance that. Yeah.
I'm also wondering, because I think, remembering back a year ago when Lori was sentenced, so a different part of the trial, she chose to spoke in her own behalf at that point. I think said some things that were I her defense attorney, I would have told her not to say.
Right.
Does Chad speak in his own defense in this phase?
That's a great question. I don't see how he can avoid it. I mean, I think he needs to look the jury in the eye and say, I'm sorry. Now, that sort of flies in the face of I didn't do it and I'm going to appeal. But if he wants the jury to save his life, I think he needs to sit up in front of them and say, I will be the model prisoner of all time. I will do whatever needs to be done, and I am repentant, and I will think about what I've done. I will think about everything, and I will do whatever's appropriate to make this right. So yeah, that's I don't see how Chad can avoid testifying.
Yeah, I think he'll have to be doing that for sure. We're going to take a quick pause here. We're also seeing that we have some possible remarks.
There is a verdict in the Trump case.
Okay, so we do have an actual verdict. Looks like the things have wrapped, and we're just waiting for that to come in. And should we take a quick break and do a little reset? We're going to take a quick break and reset everything. Again, we're following the coverage of the Chad Daybell trial. Again, guilty on all 8 counts. The penalty phase will begin in about 40 minutes from now. We'll go back live there for some of that interaction as that kicks off. We've got Greg Skordas with us in studio along with Becky Bruce. We'll step aside for a quick break. We'll come back. The verdict has been reached in the Donald Trump case in the state of New York. We'll come back with details of that coming up next right here on KSL News Radio. Stick around.
Free. Who doesn't love free? With MyLowe's Rewards, you get the member-only treatment that's actually worth it. Enjoy free member gifts you'll love. And once you reach Silver Key status, you can get free standard shipping. Because Lowe's knows nothing feels better than free. Learn more about our new loyalty program at Lowe's.com/MyLowe's Rewards today. Program subject to terms and conditions. See Lowe's.com/terms for details. Member gifts may be subject to additional terms and restrictions. See Lowe's.com/shipping terms for details. Subject to change.
It's a mystery where Old Spice finds its amazing scents like Himalayan sea salt, but I'm thrilled they have because no other body wash exfoliates and moisturizes 24/7 like Old Spice Gentleman's Himalayan sea salt body wash. Now, if only there was a mountain range separating the Indian subcontinent from the Tibetan plateau where I could hide my Old Spice and keep my family from stealing it, my impossibly smooth skin will finally be safe.
When the weather warms up, it's like a stampede, except instead of dust stirred up by hundreds of hooves, it's a cascade of phone calls to Advanced Window Products. This is Jeff Kaplan. Soon as the sun shines and the snow's gone, people want new windows and frames from Utah's #1 custom window maker, and the wait for installation grows longer. But right now, you can get near the front of the line by calling for a quote and get $2,500 off when you purchase 10 windows or more. That's on top of the incredible savings for the highest quality double-pane windows and frames, any style, any color. See, at Advanced Window Products, they actually build the windows here in Utah, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life. There's no middleman, and they can pass the savings on to you. They even offer buy now, pay later. So get in before the wait grows longer and get the $2,500 off. Get your new windows this spring. Make the call. Advanced Window Products, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100. Or visit AdvancedWindowsUSA.com.
You need to meet my aunt. Her name is Rochelle Morris, and she's running for Salt Lake County Council. She's super smart, and she really cares about people. She wants Salt Lake County to be a great place for kids. That means safe parks, safe streets, good rec centers, and making sure taxes go down instead of up. Go to voterochellemorris.com to learn more.
Thanks, Zoe and Tilly. I'm Rochelle Morris, and I'm running to make Salt Lake County work better for all of us. With my background in managing money in the private sector, I'm committed to cutting waste, holding the county accountable, and maximizing and protecting your tax dollars for you. Together, we can ensure Salt Lake County is a great place to live for many years to come. I'm Rochelle Morris, and I approve this message. Learn more at voterochellemorris.com.
That's voterochellemorris.com.
Paid for by Rochelle Morris for Salt Lake County Council.
Sign up for KSL text alerts and you could win cash. Text the word cash to 57500 for a chance to win $250. That's cash to 57500. Plus, you'll get breaking news and traffic updates right to your phone. Want to win more prizes? Text contest to 57500. Jazz fans, text the word jazz for breaking Utah jazz news. And Cougar fans, text BYU to 57500 for the latest on the Cougars. Message and data rates may apply. For an alternate entry method and complete contest rules, go to KSLNewsRadio.com.
My friends swim no matter the season, but my moderate to severe plaque psoriasis can sometimes take me out of the moment. Now, thanks to Skyrizi and clear skin, count me in. With Skyrizi, Risankizumab Riza, a prescription-only 150 milligram injection for adults who are candidates for systemic or phototherapy. 3 out of 4 people achieve 90% clear skin at 4 months.
Don't use if allergic to Skyrizi. Serious allergic reactions and an increased risk of infections or a lower ability to fight them may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check for infection and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, or if you plan to or recently received a vaccine.
Thanks to Skyrizi, there's nothing on my skin, and that means everything. Ask your doctor today about Skyrizi, the #1 dermatologist-prescribed biologic in psoriasis, and visit skyrizi.com or call 1-866-SKYRIZI to learn more.
Derek Overstreet, founder of the New Millennium Group. We're a financial planning firm. Listen, we're fiduciaries. We have advisors standing by right now to take your call. That's 888-999-6370. 888-999-6370. The reason you're going to want to call is we're going to help you retire 3 to 5 years before you thought possible. Now, imagine how that would be if you could actually retire 3 to 5 years sooner than your plan was. The way we do this is by putting together a step-by-step plan, taking into consideration any rental properties that you have, any pension income that you have, your Social Security. Listen, we put that all together for you in writing. It will allow us to build your income based on inflation. You know, inflation has been rapidly rising. You and I both need a plan that whatever we start out our income at, in 5 or 10 years, we're going to need 40% more income. So if you're one of those people listening and you'd like a plan in writing, give us a call at 888-999-6370. That's 888-999-6370, or go to utahsfinancialplanner.com.
There are so many soda weight loss success stories, Tim, like your daughter.
She lost 42 pounds.
Like me, I lost 34 pounds. And this is Chuck, who has had even more success.
I let go of about 120 pounds in about 1 year. Mobility's back. There was times like putting on socks and shoes, you'd be a little winded bending down. You know, when people see me, they're just shocked. You know, they always ask you, like, what'd you do? And I tell them, I came to soda. I did that. that, I tell them about it. At the end of the day, it's accountability. These guys, I don't think I would have done it on my own if I didn't have their support.
I tried to do it on my own, Tim. I failed miserably. I just got frustrated because I thought I was eating right, and I just kept gaining weight.
And that nutritionist that is with you every step of the way is the difference maker. It's that accountability we talk about, and his example of being able to tie your shoes. It's the little things that'll change in your life. Find out how this great program can help you. Go to SOTAweightLoss.com. It is spelled SOTA, and it stands for State of the
Art.
The Salt Lake Chamber is Utah's voice for business. Okay, that sounds great, but what does it really mean? Well, as Utah's largest and longest standing business association, they support and champion community prosperity throughout the state. And if you're in business, well, that's a very good thing for you. Be sure to listen to the Chamber's Speaking on Business, weekdays at 7:20, 11:55, and 5:20 p.m. on KSL News Radio.
When you crash your car, you get it fixed. When your computer crashes, you get a new one. But what will you do if you've been saving in a 401k or an IRA and the market crashes? If you're in your 30s or 40s, you'll be just fine. But if you're in or near retirement, you could be in trouble. Mike Stevens and his team at Capital Wealth Advisors are here to help. They can run a risk analysis to see if you're too heavily invested in the market. Don't let the ups and downs of Wall Street control you or your retirement dreams. Call 801-210-5500 today to schedule your risk analysis with Mike Stevens and the team at Capital Wealth Advisors. That's 801-210-5500. Crashes happen. Question is, are you ready? Capital Wealth Advisors, 801-210-5500. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Advisory services offered through Capital Wealth Advisors, LLC, a state of Utah registered investment advisor.
The Management Minute is a service of the MBA program in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm Scott Hammond. If you've applied for a job using one of the many computer-based systems, artificial intelligence is likely being used to screen your application. In the UK, after being furloughed for COVID, some employees were asked to reapply for jobs that they'd already successfully done. One woman was rejected because, according to the computer, she had poor body language during the interview. The algorithms used in some artificial intelligence systems attempt to objectify what is inherently subjective. For the sake of efficiency, they make decisions that impact a company and the lives of applicants. But we don't yet know the cost. We know that a biased hiring manager can do damage, but so can a computer algorithm. Learn more about ethical hiring practices in an MBA from Utah State University. Go to utahstatemba.com. That's utahstatemba.com. I'm Scott Hammond. Hope to see you in one of our classes.
If you've got a honey-do list with electrical, plumbing, heating, or air conditioning projects on it, Any Hour Services can help. Call Any Hour Services, electrical, plumbing, heating, and air. anyhourservices.com.
If you're just joining us, breaking news here on KSL News Radio. Of course, we've been following the Chad Daybell case up in Idaho. A very rapid return from the jury, guilty on all 8 counts. They are currently in recess. They will come back at about 3:15 this afternoon to start the penalty phase. A little bit of a surprise there that it is so swift. We'll continue to keep our eyes. We have our own Adam Small on the ground up there for team coverage. We'll bring you updates on that as we move through the afternoon. And on a day filled with court cases, we'll shift gears now and look to the state of New York, where the jury in the Donald J. Trump trial in the state of New York has reached a verdict, and we are just waiting for them to reconvene. We still have with us in the studio our own Greg Skordas. And Greg, big legal day today. And the fact that this came back, so jury deliberation time, the official clock was, because every network had one, 11 hours, 43 minutes to get to this verdict on 34 different counts. Anything you glean from that?
Boy, that one scares me, Boyd. I thought the quick verdict on Chad Daybell was a definite sign that he was going to be convicted. I just knew that.
Yeah.
Trump, I don't know. You would think that the jury, and they even asked some questions about, can we play back the testimony of the editor of the National Enquirer, Mr. Pecker? They asked if they could play back some other testimony, and that was today. So they were thinking about some things, and a lot of legal pundits thought these questions are sort of leaning in favor of the prosecution. These questions are questions that a jury would ask if they're leaning toward a conviction. I didn't necessarily read them that way. 34 counts, 12 jurors, all unanimously agreeing in what you say 11 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really quick. It makes you think that one side or the other really had a compelling case. What I would be surprised at is if they found him guilty of 3 and not guilty of 31 or something like that. It makes you think that they're going to be all or nothing.
Oh, interesting. That was going to be my next question. As you look at that breakdown of those 34 different counts, the fact that it has been so swift, does that make you think that they probably just kind of bundled them all together and thought, you know what? Either the case was made or the case was not made to the degree it needs to.
Either he did it or he didn't. And if he did it 34 times. If he didn't do it any time. So, yeah, I mean, I think a quick verdict, if I'm leaning one way or the other, is probably good for the state rather than for the defense in that case as well, just as it was for Chad. But we'll see. If the jury said not guilty, all 12 of them agreed unanimously that quickly, the state of New York didn't do a very good job.
Yeah, fascinating. And so we're going to continue to watch that. We will go to live coverage with ABC when the jury is brought back in. Again, the jury has reached a verdict in the Donald J. Trump trial in the state of New York, and we'll break all of that down. And, Greg, as you watch this trial play out, and obviously we weren't in the courtroom for this particular one. We had to depend on accounts of what was taking place and some really good artists drawing pictures in the courtroom. Anything surprise you along the way from either side, either the prosecution or from the defense side, in terms of a strategy, a tactic, something that might have an impact on, again, a rather rapid decision?
Well, I think the state really didn't rely on Michael Cohen, and I that's not really a surprise because you can't rely on a convicted liar. But they had 19 other witnesses to corroborate him, and I thought it was effective that they put on Pecker first, who was very credible, objective too, a friend of Trump's, and said, I like the guy, but what he did was wrong. And other people from inside the organization, I was surprised that they were able to get so many Trump insiders to come in and testify. And some of them were scared. Some of them said, I'd rather not be here. But you know what? It happened. It surprised me that they put Stormy Daniels on at all because the relationship, the affair, if it occurred, wasn't
not the issue.
Yeah, it wasn't the issue at all. It was whether or not she was paid off. So I thought that was salacious. I don't know what good it did. Even the defense was like, Your Honor, this is really inappropriate. And I thought that the defense didn't put on a lot. Maybe they were relying the same as Chad Daybell said, hey, they just don't have a very good case. We don't need to put much on. Not putting Trump on was not a surprise because how do you control Donald Trump? If you're a defense attorney, he's your nightmare. Yeah. It was also, I guess, surprising that he got away with so much during the trial, so much criticism of the judge, of the system, of the prosecution, and he was able to make all those statements during the trial. Of course, how are you going to rein him in? Even the judge said, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. Yeah, right. Fine me $100. see where that goes.
Yeah. Were there any surprises to you, the fact that the jury was not sequestered in this, just given just how big a story this is? Like, you can't go anywhere without this being on. All the networks have been going wall to wall with the coverage of this during the whole 5 weeks. Is there anything that impacts that in terms of having a sequestered jury, non-sequestered, especially as they get to this decision phase?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you would have expected maybe for them to be sequestered. But if you recall, just watching this trial, there's one thing you never, ever, ever saw an artist rendition of or anything else, and that was the jury.
Yeah.
They're anonymous. We don't know their names. We don't know their genders. We don't know their political affiliation. We don't know much about them at all. You know what I mean? And so, and no one ever will unless the jurors themselves, after the verdict, say, I would like to speak. I would like to talk about this. So given that anonymity, I suppose not sequestering them may have made some sense. Otherwise, yeah, they go home at night and people are like, hey, what are you doing? What's up with this Trump case? Where are you leaning? Where are you going? But in this case, I think they felt like they had sterilized that jury enough and had them, just had them not known, so that there was really no reason to do that.
Yeah, fascinating. It's such an interesting dynamic in all of this. Of course, in the middle of a presidential election cycle, there are all kinds of political ramifications and public opinion ramifications, which have been very interesting to watch play out in terms of how the perception is in terms of the general public, who's actually following. The good news is not a lot of Americans are following this as breathlessly as some of the reporters are, which I think is a good thing because I think everyone's out there living their lives and taking care of their families and living the American dream.
And maybe I'll turn the question on you because you're the political expert, but the verdict pro or con is going to make a huge difference in that race, don't you think? Don't you think if Trump is convicted, Boyd, and you know the political winds of this country about as well as anybody, that's going to hurt him. And if he's acquitted, maybe it boosts him through the roof.
Yeah, and that's going to be the interesting thing. So about 67% of the public say it won't matter if he's convicted.
Oh, really? Yeah.
On this particular case. Now, we have to remember there are other cases that I think are the more significant cases. The Georgia case, I think, is really the one to keep your eyes on.
Right.
But sadly, that's not going to get taken care of until into next year.
Oh, that prosecutor has butchered that one about as well as she could have.
In fact, I wanted to ask you about that, just in the context of what we're waiting to hear from this jury. Was this one of those where you had a prosecutor and you had folks who just were out over their skis? And because to me, that every expert I've talked to has said the Georgia case is the most ironclad and the most specific and probably the most damning in terms of the former president.
Correct.
And to not have an attorney general or a district attorney, excuse me, be willing to step back for the good of the case, to me,
nuts. That's absolutely crazy. And how she could risk the trial of her lifetime, the biggest case she will ever bring as was it Fulton County District Attorney. She just butchered it. She just made it about, and suddenly the focus is on her and not Donald Trump. I mean, how could you do that? How could you make such a terrible decision? And it is looked at as the strongest case. This case that we're hearing right now, that we're about to get a verdict, was by all accounts the weakest case, the case that nobody liked. The other two are federal cases, so we're thinking, depending on how the political winds blow, he may very well recuse himself or what's the word? Pardon himself when he becomes president and say, I'm not allowing the Justice Department to even proceed. But Georgia and New York state cases are state cases. D.C. and Florida are the federal cases.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to look at all of that. And sadly, I think the Georgia case also undermines just that trust factor, that credibility, makes it feel more political.
Right.
And again, I think that's part of the reason why the numbers continue to surprise me, that 67% say, hey, even if he's convicted in New York, that's not going to change my opinion. Now, some of those people aren't changing their opinion because they're not voting for him anyway.
Right, yeah. Well, and you also have to wonder this. If he's convicted and he's a convicted felon, how does that play into our Constitution and how a person can serve as president of the United States? Are there qualifications that you can't serve if you're a convicted felon? Does it recuse him from even being president? I mean, we're going to make some tough decisions in this country depending on what this verdict is.
Yeah, and this will be a lot of people saying, hey, this is the beginning of the end. I think it's just the end of the beginning.
You're right.
As it relates to all of this. And there's a whole lot of politics that are going to play. And to your point, Greg, just as we round out the hour here, we're getting ready to hand it over to Jeff Kaplan. We're standing by. The jury has reached a verdict in the Donald J. Trump trial in the state of New York on the hush money case. So we will hear that verdict. We've got Greg Skordas in studio. We've got you covered everywhere. We've also got Adam Small up in Idaho, continuing to follow the Chad Daybell case as well. And Greg, I think just as we round this out, I think it's so fascinating that if these verdicts come back, 34, come back and say he's not guilty, what the former president will parlay that into in terms of witch hunt and all of those kinds of things. I'm sure there'll be a fundraising email in your box very soon. All right, we're going to go ahead and step aside for some top of the hour news here on KSL News Radio. Don't go anywhere. We're standing by, waiting for the jury, which has reached a verdict in the Donald J. Trump trial. Stay with us here on KSL News Radio. We've got you covered. We'll be back with more.
KSL FM Midvale, KSL Salt Lake City.
Good afternoon, 3 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Jeff Kaplan, 70 degrees in Salt Lake City. We have a lot going on this afternoon. First, the Trump jury has reached a verdict at his hush money trial in New York. We're expecting the jury might be back in the